healing. I kept healing, and the intuition started waking up more and more. And at some point, I just started hearing what I would call it. At the time, I was calling it hearing spirit guides. I didn't really have another name for it. I didn't know who or what they were. I knew the voices weren't me, and they felt, and it was a hearing and feeling. I could feel it. It was sort of an extension of my own intuitive cord that had been strengthening. And sometimes the voices were very in alignment. Sometimes they were reflections of my own fear. I could feel them and hear them, and I was like, oh, that doesn't feel very good. Because you do need discernment when the channel opens. Like, it's not all light and rainbows. It can be, and it's meant to be ultimately, but there is other stuff out there. They're all just kind of reflecting parts of you, unhealed parts of you. So I was hearing, it was messy, but at some point I just gave myself over completely to it.
Well, it's good to see you.
You too. Good to see you in person and on the screen.
On the screen, yeah.
Virtually.
You're a clinically trained doctor of psychology, and you describe yourself as an intuitive psychologist and a channeler. So I'd love for you to share your journey. How did you get from A to B?
It's a good question. Feels like I went A to Z, but let's see. Yeah, so I was in the doctorate program for, it was 5 years, and then and longer really, because after training, you go on your internship, and then your postdoc, and then for some people it never ends, and that's your identity, that's your label, you've got it, doctorate, clinical psychologist, yes, this is my thing now, I've made it. And maybe you think your journey ends there. It doesn't. but or maybe you think you'll just keep pursuing that lineage, right? That lineage of Western thought, whatever. And even within that, there are so many branches, right? No one agrees, even within that field of, are you a behavioral CBT theorist or a psychoanalyst or something in between, or are you into IFS, or now at this point, it wasn't so much the case when I was in school, but at this point, it's really all about trauma. And if you don't, and that's my personal opinion, but I would also say that it's so popular now, the word trauma, that probably most people would say that they're trauma-informed therapists, which was not really, I'm not meaning to say I was in school so long ago, but even when I was in school, like, trauma was like an elective, maybe. It wasn't like a main class on trauma, which, maybe from an outsider's perspective, you would think that should be the thing. But it was kind of like everything was talking around trauma, because you would learn lineages of theory, like I mentioned, like cognitive behavioral therapy, some existentialist philosophy, psychoanalysis, which is what I was drawn to, and attachment theory. And it all talks about trauma, but it wouldn't sort of label it explicitly. So yeah, I was guided to that, and I was in my late 20s, really at the beginning of my, or just before my Saturn return, for anyone, sort of astrologically minded. And that came out of a period, a huge pivot. I don't want to say bigger than the pivots I've taken recently, because they feel very big. But at that time, it was, really from a pretty dark time, depression and substance use and kinds of things. So I was coming into alignment with the general field of my service, a general sense of mission in the healing arts. And at that time, grad school psychology was kind of all I knew. I'd been open to some forms of intuitive healing, and through my mother, and some energy work, but it was like on the side. It was like a hobby. It was a curiosity. I was always kind of open spiritually, and I was interested in Buddhist philosophy from my father, but I didn't see that as like a career, or at least my path. So this was the best thing I knew of, and probably also my ego, not necessarily like the grandiose ego, but like the insecure ego was like, I need to be, and other people would reflect this, like, this is how people will respect you and validate you as a person in this field, is, pursuing this high level of education. And it was good. It was, I did well in school, and school was never a thing that I had excelled at a ton previously. I just had a lot of issues in school for various reasons. But at that time, I jumped right in, small classes, did very well, threw myself into this theory. But I was sick. I was also navigating a very deep mind, body, and spirit illness. I got this medical label of chronic fatigue syndrome, but I knew even before I was open to spirit that like this was not it. It's like there was also just like very little research about it. There's no biomedical etiology. I ended up writing my dissertation on this very thing. So I was navigating this, and that sort of kept me tethered to my own personal healing journey and this mind, body, and spiritual ailment I was going through. It wasn't allowing me to just do a little bit of therapy and just be a therapist. There was a very long-term crisis unfolding that I could do a pretty good job of hiding because I was getting percentages better. But even by the end of my training, I was still it had sort of manifested and twisted into me just getting sick quite often. And then just other things, almost nearly falling asleep in sessions and just gritting my teeth through it, kind of feeling like I had COVID. And this was like 10 years. And it changed over that time. But this personal initiation and invitation to grow was what ultimately got me to leave and explore other things. Because again, I was interested and I was open, but I was pretty attached, sort of ego identity, like I achieved the thing I thought I wanted, even though it wasn't really fulfilling my soul. It wasn't really fulfilling my spirit, but I didn't really know those things were totally on the table. I didn't even know that I could be not depressed, until like my 30s. I didn't really, I was hopeful, but very cautiously optimistic. And again, when you're training and living within that frame, that Western frame, there's not a lot being mirrored back to you or reflected back to you that you can heal in what I would call miraculous ways and really grow and really heal your trauma and really heal your anxiety and really discover what lights you up and really pursue your passion. Like, you get to the end of the road and people are like, okay, welcome to being a psychologist. You're going to fill your caseload. You're going to make a little more money, not like a ton more money. And, it's just going to see like 10 people a day. And some days it's going to be really hard and you're not always going to like the work and all these like limiting beliefs, frankly. And there's a part of my soul, part of my nature that was waking up that was like, no, not for me. Not for me. But it was coming in the form of real physical distress, which is what ultimately, because, I've often sort of made the joke, like I would have loved a nicely worded letter that said, you're meant to pursue a more expansive path, but I probably would have thrown that letter in the trash. I wouldn't have listened. Well, I'm going to change my life. I'm just going to step out of this huge thing that I just dedicated so much of my life to, like, and what? And do what? Like, I have no idea. But something I would call, that was the seed of the intuition that was waking up. I wouldn't have called it that, but it was some form of guidance that was like, no, you have to go to save yourself. And I started working with a few more healers, alternative, we could call them, with different ways of knowing, outside the field. And I was having wild experience, kind of like I was just describing to you before we started about the pranic healing venture I've been on. I was having very deep experiences in my body. I would experience all my symptoms vanish with some forms of energy medicine. I would just experience these clairvoyant healers where they were speaking to my soul, and some people, more cynically minded or closed-minded might say, yeah, that could apply to everyone. But that's the thing is, of course it could apply to everyone because we're all going through similar things, but when you feel it, that's the discernment. That's how you know in your heart that someone is really speaking to you and for you. And I was just having those experiences. And so it eventually did get me to, and this happened all in like very close timeline. I was just studying and I had passed after a grueling few months of studying for the licensing exam, which is like a horrid test, but it was like this final initiation, because once I got it, I got the license, and everyone was like clapping and celebrating me. I was like, yeah, I don't think I'm going to do this. It was like this final realization. They're like, oh yeah, I got this thing. I don't. And it was kind of like, it was coming in practically too, because I was still, my ego is still not prepared to step out on my own. So I was trying to have my cake and eat it too. I was like, I'll stay at the clinic, but I'll start branching off and working independently. And I was going to work with people in chronic pain, because that's something that I was passionate about, and learning about mind-body medicine and the nervous system and trauma. But I wasn't going to be able to get the license for like 6 months. And something inside me was just like, no, I'm not waiting. What? No. And so it was just through a series of events, like intuitively guided. It was just like, I'll just be a coach. Because, it's a gray area. Frankly, you can just kind of be a coach. And, there's obviously risks to that, and some potential issues with that, but there's also a possibility with that. And everyone frowned upon that. They're like, what? You just got a doctorate in psychology. Now you're going to just call yourself a coach? I was like, I don't know. I don't care. I was starting to talk about spirit guides with my supervisors, and it all just kind of spiraled to the point where they're like, yeah, you can't really work here anymore. And I was like, yeah, I know. I don't really think I want to. I was just kind of trying to stay out of safety. So I left. The conviction, I was terrified. I had no clients. The conviction that was in my body, because I was starting to heal, and not just heal physically, but heal. I was recognizing that my whole life had been led by fear. I was still, even after pursuing and getting these accolades and everything I thought I was working for, I was still trying to be good enough, still trying to please people, still trying to be smart enough, trying to impress my supervisors, all this stuff. And I could see the life paths playing out for my peers of just like starting to get a little burned out, starting to just fill up your caseload and concede a little bit to the system. Nothing against the system. Nothing against the system. They're just doing what they think, what they know in sort of their own belief systems of this is how you run a clinic, and this is, and you give most of your money in a clinic, all this other kind of stuff that I was like, I just don't, I don't think I want to work this hard, frankly. And there's just more in me I need to expand. I don't know, like, there was this thing as a clinician where even after you came out of grad school, it's like you still had this grad school mindset where you had to fill all your time with like learning and like book club and like, cultural competence, all good things, good to be culturally competent, but like, if that's all your time, when do you have time to unfold what's inside you? Like, what if I wanted to write a book, which I do? What if I just needed more time and space. And so though it was terrifying, it was also a gift from spirit that when I left, I was just confronted with all this time and space. And it was scary, but from that sort of darkness, from that void, was birthed all this sort of writing and just creativity and healing. I kept healing, and the intuition started waking up more and more. And at some point, I just started hearing. What I would call it. At the time, I was calling it hearing spirit guides. I didn't really have another name for it. I didn't know who or what they were. I knew the voices weren't me, and they felt, and it was a hearing and feeling. I could feel it. It was sort of an extension of my own intuitive cord that had been strengthening. And sometimes the voices were very in alignment. Sometimes they were reflections of my own fear. I could feel them and hear them, and I was like, oh, that doesn't feel very good. Because you do need discernment when the channel opens. Like, it's not all light and rainbows. It can be, and it's meant to be ultimately, but there is other stuff out there. They're all just kind of reflecting parts of you, unhealed parts of you. So I was hearing, it was messy. But at some point I just gave myself over completely to it, because I sensed that's what I personally needed to, let's see what the word is, contain or quiet or humble the ego, and really release my own addiction to thinking, was to just give myself over completely. Like, what am I going to eat? Intuitively. Where am I going to go on this walk? Intuitively. Like, just guide me. And I wouldn't recommend that to everybody. There's some issues with that. It's like you can get yourself into some sticky situations, but there was something inside me. It was just in my nature to sort of jump off cliffs, you know?
Was there something that happened? Did you see a certain healer? Was there, you know, was it right when you decided that you were going to leave and do something else that you started hearing the voices? And how did you know that the voices weren't just in your head and you were making it up? Can you explain to the audience how you can decipher between spirit and your own mind?
Yeah. This really is the question, isn't it? This is the ultimate question. And it's one that continues to unfold, frankly. And the reason is that I'll go back and answer the first question about, like, you know, what really, you know, some specific moments. But I want to answer the second one first because it's so core, right? It's like, well, how do you know? You're not just insane. How do you know? And the thing is like, you don't. Not in the way that you think, because we all think we know, right? But a lot of that is based on our thinking. If you ask anyone, they don't have to be spiritual, how do you know that the voice in your head is you? How do you know? What is that? You know, ask anyone on the street. How do you know? Maybe what are they going to say? They don't, no one knows. That's the thing, is we think we know. But when you really reflect, the mind, people don't even know what they mean by mind, but when I refer to it as the belief system, the perceiver. There's also an observer, but let's just speak to the perceiver that, you know, perceives our reality and creates our beliefs. You know, that thinker, it can't know anything. It can only think. When you really reflect, the mind can't discern truth from falsehood. It just forms a bunch of beliefs. But then after 30 years, maybe the beliefs change and you go, oh, I was wrong, you know? So, like, you could ask someone at 25, how do you know this? Well, I know this because, you know, and I'm not just talking about 2 + 2 = 4. It's more like, how do you know that what you think is true? How do you know that what you think about yourself is true? How do you know that what you think about the world is true? And so people could give you a list of propositions or whatever, but then at 35 or 45, they'd be like, oh yeah, no, that was all garbage, turns out. You know, so that way of knowing is not the way. It's just not how you know. Even in the realm of what we call science, right? We may know things for centuries, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, cocaine isn't good for you, it turns out. You know, it's like, you just learn things. You know until you don't. You know until you don't. And this way is a different way of knowing. So the way to answer the question is not so much by proving to you how I know in the traditional form of knowing. It's by inviting you or the audience to consider that there is another way that is based actually in the heart space. It's based more in feeling. And I don't just mean emotions, because emotions aren't facts either. But emotions are the fuel for our thinking, right? We can have a thought and a negative emotion, and we can hate that thought. We can have the same thought with an emotion of love, a feeling of love, and we can love that thought, right? And it can be a thought about our childhood. It can be a thought about another person. So the feelings are actually more of the compass for our path. The thoughts carry wisdom. They're energetic sources of information, but without the feeling, at least in the human body, we're lost at sea. There's a million bajillion thoughts. Ask someone about themselves. They're like, I don't know, I think I'm this, I think I'm that. It's the feeling that really kind of guides the ship at sea. And, you know, people who are more, let's call them evidence-based, you know, they're not going to give a whole lot of credence to that. They're going to say, no, it's got to play out in the research. But okay, what does the research say about you, about who you are? No. And where do ideas for research come from anyway? They come from you. They come from the mind. Like, it's not, research is not an objective practice. It comes from the subjective, playing it out in a very valid system, but it all starts within. So I'll preface it with that, and then say that it takes some time to play that out, because you got to connect to the heart, and most of us are not, myself included. I was so wrapped up in my thinking, and I was pretty good I could be very good conceptually, psychoanalytically. But again, I was racked with anxiety because I didn't know these things. I didn't know this conceptualization of this person was true. I just thought it. I thought it. But when you start to feel, and you sort of surrender to this compass, you just start to trust. You start to trust, and you go, I kind of trust in a universal intelligence. It just feels right to me. And there's feedback, right? For me, the healing of my body was very convincing. It lent me a lot of conviction. And then things will play out sort of like, I would just get messages and they would kind of come true, like, you're not going to get a parking ticket here. Don't worry about it. After a while, you just start to trust, right? And low stakes, low stakes things. And for me, I wasn't doing any more intakes with clients because I was meditating and I was just getting messages. And again, how do I know? I didn't, but I wouldn't bring that information in. And almost every time it would start to play out. The vision I had of them with a particular emotion or circumstance would just tend to play out. So kind of feedback through my mirroring back from my experience. But here's the thing for everyone that starts to go through this, everyone that I know, is as you start to feel your way through it, there's fear conditioning, right? There's because we're all, yes, I call myself a channel, but we're all channels. It's just that most of us are channeling our trauma. Most of us are channeling our trauma conditioning. Right? And so if you ask that person, how do you know that voice is you? They're like, well, I've always been with it. Okay, well, does it have your best interest at heart? I don't know. It beats me up a lot of the time, but it's the only voice I got, right? So they just kind of assume that that's it, but maybe that's conditioning, right? Maybe that voice has been conditioning. So what I would say is, a more accessible frame is like, there's this notion of positive self-talk, right? It's a popular psychological concept. So even the idea of getting that voice in your head to speak more kindly about yourself, now you're starting to channel something different, right? Now you're starting to say no thank you to the punishing voice. You're starting to only allow in what I would call a high vibration or frequencies of compassion, of self-love, and all that. Well, now what is that? How do you know? How do you know that's not just you? Is that God? Is that and you don't. And I didn't know either. All I knew is that it was functional. It was working for me. I didn't know what these voices were. I didn't. I felt like I kind of heard and I felt like these are not voices I've ever really heard before. And you could say, oh, well, how do you know you're not schizophrenic, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I have feelings about that are basically like you're still channeling. It's just, you don't have any... the brain
no filters.
No filters. The brain is heavily distorted and conditioned. But I didn't know what the sources were. I was just trusting how it felt, and something inside me knew, and there was like a synchronicity of things that were moving me forward that I just had a little bit more faith in, and a little bit more faith in. But I would go through immense periods of doubt, like sheer terror, because once you start to stop listening to what I would call that ego thinking, the ego freaks out, and it's going to bring up all the deepest fears, like you're crazy, what do people think of you, etc. This isn't going to work. But it's almost like these series of initiations, and when you can work with the fear, when you can recognize the fear isn't you, the fear is the conditioning. At times it feels very much like you, but you start to come out into these beautiful spaces. You go through the dark night of the soul, and suddenly you're in a bed of flowers, and it's just feeling so aligned. You're feeling high, like higher than I've ever been from any substance. And I'm like, what is this? Am I manic? Am I crazy? I had all this clinical training. And so I just kind of knew, like, there's really no way to convince anyone else. But in myself, I was like, I feel stable. I feel stably minded. I actually feel clearer than I've ever been. I'm not, because I know what it's like to be depressed. I know what it's like to be racked with fear and anxiety. I know what it's like to be paranoid. It wasn't that. It was clarity. It was grace. It was loving. I didn't really know the feeling of love for the first 30 years of my life. That sounds crazy to say. I knew my parents loved me. I had some early trauma, but I grew up in a in a well-intentioned environment, but I didn't really know. I had so much shame. But when you start to feel love, it's hard to, you're not really going to question it and say, this can't be real. I mean, you might, but your whole body is lit up. You just know. You just
Right.
know. And that has continued. And I won't say there aren't moments of severe doubt, moments of severe fear and questioning, but over time, you have a built-up sort of tank of conviction where you can look back and say, remember when you were going through and you didn't think this was going to work out and you thought it was all crazy, and then and it worked out and you got that apartment and you landed on your feet. And so you kind of look back. And for me, again, I'm healthier than I've ever been. I still go through, some would say I have a finely tuned instrument of a body, though it's gotten a lot stronger, a lot more powerful. But that healing has always lent me a lot of personal conviction to trust the guidance and, to see and the love, the feeling of love. Some people wouldn't even acknowledge that that's what they're really after. But let me tell you, it's what you're after. And when you feel it, you realize, oh, this is what I've been, like all the NDE people you have on here, right? What do they come back and say? They're like, I felt the most encompassing love I've ever. And when you feel that,
Yep.
you know, even if you don't know, you just want to stay there. You just want to stay. And so I just wanted to stay there, and I still do.
Yeah, it's hard not to chase that. Once you've seen it, once you've felt it, once you've touched it, it's hard to you want it all the time. But it's amazing because you really can tap into that anytime. You can tap into that same space, that same love, and doing whatever you need to do to get into alignment. So no, I feel you and I hear you and I understand, I get it. It's like a visceral response in your body where you just know. And I just wanted to hear your explanation of it because it's so hard to explain. It's really ineffable. You really can't. But for me, I've described, because I wouldn't, yes, everyone is a channel, right? I don't think I'm there yet calling myself a channel, although I've definitely have had moments, especially in ceremony, sitting with ayahuasca, where I have spirit come in and it's just it's so fast. It feels like someone is grabbing a folder from my desktop and just dropping it onto the USB drive, and the information is just there. It's boom, boom, boom. And I'm asking a question and the answer's coming as the question's being asked. And it's just this fast back and forth communication that's really wild. And it's great in ceremony. And then coming back, it's just the further you get from these experiences, the ego will creep in and it'll be oh, that wasn't real. That was just your mind, right? But it was real. And and like you said, the more that you give yourself over to just trusting the experience, I've found now that it's like learning a new language, talking to spirit. It's just understanding how it comes through.
It is like that for me too. And one thing I'll say, just to validate your own experiences, because particularly with plant medicines, I found because in plant medicines, the channel opens so powerfully, they're so intense that it can be so disorganizing. And the ego mind is rapidly trying to make sense of the experience, so it comes up with all these stories. And it's not so different from just the more general sort of what I would call the Kundalini awakening or in the channel opening, even without the medicines. But with those medicines, it's so powerful. So when you come out of it, the mind is trying to grapple and come up with all these stories. But that's the part where I'd say, we don't know. Because it's like you said, trust the experience, but loosen your attachment to the story. Because you have an experience with plant medicine, or I have an experience with what I call spirit or guides, etc. But then I have all these stories, and I hear things, and they're like, you're a channel, and or ET beings, and you're going to do this, and you're going to do that. And the ego is like, oh my God, so cool. I'm this now. And you want to tell people, and I tell my mother and she's like, what? And I'm like, I don't know. But, and then you start to live your daily life and you're like, well, I don't know. I have all these stories now, but I don't actually know if they're true. And you get yourself in a little bit of trouble because the stories are never going to be the thing. That's never going to be the thing that you know. The stories are mind-based. It's the feeling of the experience that you trust. And so you learn to come back to presence, because only in presence will you know. You can never know anything outside of presence. Outside of presence, even if it's channeled information. I do a lot of channeled writing, but now I've learned to hold it loosely. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Oh, this is going to happen. Cool. Oh, nice. We'll see. And because, the guidance can feel so powerful, and I can feel so good in the channeled state. And it's good. It's very validating for me in my path. But when you come out of that, you got to go back to being human. You got to go back to being in your body, being with the shadows, being with the doubts. And if you want to hold on to that story and be like, but remember, you're going to be this kind of person. You're going to be like, on the bridge between contact with races. And it's like, okay, but that's not now. So what am I going to do? Like, hold on to that? And like, no, you got to let go of it and say, if that's meant to arrive, it will arrive. But I'm here now. And once you do that, that's when you can feel into that frequency of love again. And all of the stories, as fantastical and exciting as it is to have all these stories about guides and angels and whatever, they're just stories. And that's not to say they aren't true. There's stories that I happen to ride with, but I'm open to the stories changing, actually. I actually hold it's not so much that my beliefs have changed. They have, but I also just hold them loosely, because it's more about, okay, how can I feel into this moment and allow the expansiveness of the mind to allow in what's meant to be known. That's the main difference of the journey now. Is in the past, I was always trying to think ahead. I was always trying to prepare for everything, prepare for my life, prepare for this meeting, prepare for this presentation. And I never knew a goddamn thing. I prepared so heavily, and then I would be so anxious. And now it's just become clear that I'll know when I'm meant to. I'll know and when I know, it will be now. It will be now when I know. And so I'll show up to something like this, and I'll meditate, and I'll come into alignment with the feeling. But I'll do my best to let go of the stories, because the stories are never going to they could be true, could be partially, right, but not necessarily.
It's true. I mean, it's absolutely true. Like I don't know if that's my ancestors talking to me in ceremony, but it feels like it.
It feels like it.
My experience is what matters. Like whether it happened or not, doesn't matter. My experience of it is real, and you take that feeling with you. And I have these little anchors that when I'm in a tough spot, when things get a little hard, I go right back to that feeling, right back to that knowing, right back to that love, and I'm in alignment and then fully present in the moment. And it's like a big release, and it feels so great. It feels so good.
It feels so good. And when I can't always get back to that place. Sometimes I got to ride out the doubt and the anxiety and the pain of it. But when I am welcomed back, when I allow myself back into that frequency, you realize that all the things you were trying to know from the fear were just playing out different stories of fear. You realize that that's why the thoughts are not necessarily fueled in themselves, at least in the human form. They're all fueled by our survival wiring, the ego or the emotions. So from the place of fear, everything I'm trying to figure out, it's just going to be figured out from fear. Well, is this going to happen? Am I going to perform well? Am I going to get more clients? Am I going to this? And if it's from fear, you're just going to stay in that pool, swimming around in that pool. Once you get back into the bigger pool of love, you're like, oh, it's okay. I don't actually need answers to those questions. Maybe they'll come. Mm-hmm. But in the frequency, what you know is that all is well. All is provided for, you're aligned, and those are actually the only things you ever needed to know. But in the fear, your ego convinces you need to know exactly what you're going to wear tomorrow and what someone's going to think of you. And it's you start tricking yourself to think you need to know all these things that you don't actually, and that you couldn't know.
Yeah. Oh, it's so true. Yeah. There's one thing I do know, though. Or one thing that I do believe is, a lot of these things that we're talking about, because it's in our mind. But I literally, I had a supernatural experience in ceremony, and I saw with my eyes an orb manifest right in front of me, and this glowing orb that was breathing and in an instant like communicating with me this love energy, and I could not literally could just not believe what I was seeing, feeling like my body couldn't contain it. It was so good, like I couldn't hold it. It was so fucking good. I was just like, I went from being at my lowest low to like, God is what? Are you fucking kidding me right now? This is happening to me. I thought like this was happening to everybody. I wanted to go out in ceremony and just be, did you got, it's real. This whole thing, this is real. And I'm like, okay, like Spirit was like, okay, this is, humble yourself. Like, this is, yes, it's real, but like, just watch your words. I had to like calm myself after this experience, because it was like seeing something outside. It was like as if a UFO landed in my front yard and I went outside and saw it and they communicated with me and then they took off. Like, it was that real, and it happened outside of my body, which was amazing. So those are like paranormal experiences that, don't happen all the time. But like that for me has been my anchor too, is just like, okay, all right, we have our problems. Yes, we have to pay bills and we have these things, and we have fear is always going to be a thing that we have to, battle with. But it's really great having that awareness, just having that awareness and just trusting that everything's okay. Even when it's not okay, it's okay. It's going to be okay. Everything is temporary. Everything is temporary. And in the end, we'll find out.
And that really is the mission for those who are open to it, is like beginning to have these multi-dimensional experiences. Now, that's my language. You don't have to call it multi-dimensional, just have paranormal, call it whatever you want. Experiences that exist outside the conditioned reality we are all believing in. And then dancing with what I would call this third dimension, right? The polarity, the human body, the separateness, because we all look pretty damn separate. I'm in this body. You look like you're in that body. It's hard to believe that we're all one. Like, what does that mean? I don't see it. I don't feel it. Yeah. So you have experiences, and then you want to stay there, but we come back in. And what I feel, the channeled information that I receive, is that no longer are we here to escape the body, which at times in the past, historically, for channels, for enlightened beings, ascended masters who have walked the earth, it's like, it's okay. The body's sick. The body has cancer. Well, I'm not the body, so it's all good. I'm in this higher place. But, maybe for them that was aligned because we didn't have the technologies. We didn't have the knowledge of trauma. We didn't really know how to heal it. But now it's changing. There's a new paradigm of medicine. And so we're meant to ascend through the body. So for me, the mission of what we may call ascension, or the opening, or the raising of consciousness, the recognition of those principles of oneness, etc., and trauma healing are merging, so that the physical density, the physical body, the nervous system wiring, and the brain itself can upgrade in capacity to allow the sustaining of that higher vibration. Because now we're going up, we're going down, we're going up. Oh my God, I see God. I'm just so depressed. I don't even want to live. It's like, and it's a roller coaster. Yep. And things are speeding up. So it's happening very frequently, in fast succession. But it's because, in my sense, there is a simultaneous process happening where it's part of what I feel my mission is. In part, there's a few missions that I hear about that I hold loosely, as I mentioned, but one of which is to support this integration of a new Earth medicine, 21st century medicine, to support the activation of the body, the upgrading of the body, so that we will, maybe it'll take a couple thousand years, but we will exist in a place where there is no more pain, no more illness, no more physical stress, because the body will have, I'm not even sure we'll call ourselves human at that point, but the body will have upgraded enough to exist at what I would call a higher dimensional plane. But for now, for those of us, there's so much faith needed, because we still have to come back down into all this polarity and be like, oh my God, how I had that experience, but now I'm having this experience and I'm reading the news and it's like, how do I hold both things? It's so, and that's sort of,
so human.
Yeah, so human. It's so human. It's what we came here to do, we came here to, and if you wanna, and many sort of will maybe choose, choose is a relative term. We kind of have relative free will here. Choose to stay in the polarity, stay in the fear. I mean, they may not consciously consider there are other options, but choose to play that out. For those of us that have experiences like you're talking about, there's kind of this point of no return where it's like you could try to suppress that or repress that, but there's something that just it activates a seed inside you that's like, you're never going to forget this, and you're going to, if you have a UFO encounter or whatever, and it's speeding up. So more and more that it's going to happen. But for those of us that have, for me, I never actually answered your first question, which was, things started to change through some, you kind of mentioned it, through some meetings with intuitives that I was trusting. They knew things about me, and I had physical energetic experiences in their presence, and then it was sort of speeding up. But the channeling, and you are a channel too, but it's and this is the thing with labels, right? Like I never knew what to, I didn't just have an experience and say, oh, I'm a channel. Like I don't, the labels are so tricky because they're not the thing, right? The labels are not the thing. And I didn't, even intuitive psychologist, which was kind of your first question. At some point it was just like, well, I can't really deny that I have all this psychological training. It's still a part of me. But I also can't deny this other thing. And intuition is a word that, a lot of people, even if they don't know what it means, it's a little more accessible than, let's say, the word channel. Like, intuition, people feel like that means maybe trusting your gut, or people have all kinds of meanings for that. So for me, it was like, okay, I'll blend them, and people are like, oh, intuitive psychologist, what's that? I'm like, I don't know. I made it up. It felt right. But channel, at some point, the information, I was kind of like the orb experience you're describing. I was having these experiences where the voices were starting to get closer and closer, where I felt, they identify themselves differently. I don't really need to go into all of it, but
I would love for you to go into all of it.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
I didn't mean to cut you off, but like, I am curious, like, and I'm sure my audience is like, okay, like, who are you channeling? Have they shared that with you? And is it a collective? Like, yeah, let's get weird. Like, I mean, I want to hear it all, and I'm sure the audience does too. If they're listening to this, they want to hear it all. So
yeah. Thank you for reminding me where I am, because at other points it's like for accessibility's sake, it's just like, see if the information resonates with you. But good, yeah, okay, let's get into it.
Right.
So
yeah, and if it doesn't for those listening, then let it go, and if it does, then great.
Exactly. Yeah. What I'll say about that is, again, it's the same thing about the story, right? Like, I hear a story of where the information is coming from, but I invite you to hold that story loosely. If it resonates with you, great. If not, just see if the information resonates, or otherwise let it go. And so at first, I didn't have any story. I had met with people who called themselves intuitives and shamans, and I was like, I'm sort of trusting that chord. Again, it was like, what do I eat for dinner? Whatever. At some point, there were voices, and I don't know, at some point it felt like they were identifying themselves as different archangels. Now, I had very limited understanding of what any of this meant. Like, I was pretty open, but I didn't know about archangels, ascended master, Pleiadian. I wasn't that like super into ETs. I just didn't know a lot of it. But I was guided to start learning more when I was hearing. So Archangel Michael was a name that came through. At some point, there were some other archangels. And that was kind of it for a little while. And, some people who identify more as like classic mediums, I guess you could say, they converse with a lot of souls that were human that crossed over, people who have died. And then they sort of, maybe they call that channeling that I kind of knew I was communicating with some ancestors, but like I was never really talking to a lot of souls that were human before. I just kind of knew. They were just felt different. It was just these sources of and some people think, oh, that must mean ETs. Well, loosen the spectrum, right? It's not just humans and ETs. I mean, we're all ETs. It's just there's different, let's call them densities or dimensions. There are some sources of information that are more collective. They're more they're more just sources of energy. They're not physical, right? And it was more like that. The archangel energy, I sense, exists at like the eighth sort of dimensional plane, and at least that's sort of the information that I hear. And density, eighth density. We call them archangels, but frankly, they're just those sort of density sources or beings. And then when I had an experience after I was being told, you're a channel, and I was being guided to investigate a little bit, which is how I came upon Bashar, who is, the story is that Bashar is an ET being channeled by this guy, Daryl Anka. It was a story that resonated with me even before I knew much at all about ET. I just kind of felt intuitively. I was like, this is real. I just kind of like know it. And then I had an experience where, I have a meditation practice in the morning. And in that meditation practice, I was often a time where I was hearing and communing. Sometimes I couldn't hear the way I wanted to hear and I was frustrated, whatever. But some experiences started to happen where these voices were coming in, but they were much closer to me. And I now reflect on that and feel that it's because they had been human before. Those, I just felt it a bit closer to me. They were like far away in, those different densities or whatever. But they just felt closer to me. And they identified as ascended masters. One was identified as El Moria. And another was Saint Germain. But again, I didn't learn any of this stuff. I didn't read any books on this stuff. I bought some books following that and reading about it and reading that, El Moria there's a story that El Moria is associated in the light of the blue flame and associated with Archangel Michael. And it was like, yes, you have the light of the blue flame and you're protected, and all this stuff. And I was crying when it happened because it was so visceral. I could feel the energy. This El Moria energy. It was so, and again, I'm a visceral person, right? So I'm feeling it. So I could trust the feeling. I had this feeling-based experience. There's the story, but I had this feeling, and I just knew they told me to start recording myself. And so I would start speaking from the message. In the past, I'd never done that. I was only sort of having an inner dialogue. But they were like, start speaking. Start hitting record on your phone. And it was weird. Even when there's no audience, you're like, am I about to do this? Like, I'm just in my bedroom alone. But you're just like, all right. And it just starts coming through and the voice sounds different. And the truth is that my voice pretty much sounds like me when I channel. I don't really channel anything typically. In my writing, I do. But now I would just commune with what I call the high self. It's very accessible for people. My eyes are open. I'm not like doing this, which is what I was doing for a little while before I even was showing it to anyone. But I was recording. And again, it's just like after that experience, I'm like, what the hell do I do with this? I'll just go about my day. I guess I'll make some eggs, And like, I knew enough at that point to know not to like rush out and share it with a bunch of people. I'd been sharing things with my family and they're pretty open, but there are levels to the game, right? And I was like, all right, let's just keep that to me for a bit. But it, kept happening and then you'll go through periods where it's not happening and I'm wishing it would happen more because it feels so good. And so I was kind of hearing like, I think I'm a channel. Like, I don't know. And, as I was learning a bit, my own feeling is that, channeling is just another word to commune with higher dimensional planes and densities. And some historically maybe sort of give their body away, like Abraham Hicks, Esther just becomes Abraham or Daryl just becomes Bashar. I kind of knew intuitively that was not going to be me. And what I sense is that's not going to be anyone anymore because we're upgrading. We don't need that kind of conviction to make it feel real. That's very convincing when that happens to the channel themselves. It's like, oh, this isn't me. We don't necessarily need that to convince us. And we're also upgrading the physical vessel enough where we're not really meant to give our bodies over to anything. It's my personal impression. And but so it stayed that way for a while. Different. So it was ascended masters, and then there were some sources that identified as ET beings. So there was, and then Oh man, I'm gonna pull up my phone and just look at my recordings, and we'll see some of the things I just wrote down. Different names. The Arcturian Council, Arcturus, Avon, who was, I don't know, I think Avon was like an Andromedan collective, high density, and look, these are, make what you will of this. I don't even know what to make of this stuff. This is just, different names. And then it started to become a little more, and that happened for a while. And then there was this period where it kind of reached this boiling point where it was like, you're meant to start sharing this. And that was pretty challenging for me because I knew that was going to be very disruptive. And already my path was like, intuitive psychologist. Yeah, like I'm out there. But, the language was accessible enough where you could hear intuitive psychologist and kind of just form your own impression about like, oh, he's just kind of different. He's a little holistic, right? Not nothing too crazy, Once you start using the word channel and you start talking about Pleiadians, people are like, oh, he's lost his mind. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So I kind of knew I was like, okay, this is a new stage. And I was, there was more fear that showed up, but again, the guidance was such that I like couldn't turn away from. I mean, I have free will, but I just knew I was like, this is the way forward. And I learned a bit about video recording. I did not know much about it. Started recording, I had a podcast at that point, but it wasn't video. Put up a camera. And then again, the same anxiety hitting record. It's like, okay, here we go. And I'd started doing I write a lot. And the writing had started becoming more channeling too. And so there were these sources that started identifying themselves. So it was like an archangel was coming through, Archangel Uriel or something. And then there was the Pleiadian collective. And when that started coming through, I'd heard that word before. I'd heard of Pleiadians. I didn't know, and I've sort of learned and come to some of my own conclusions. Like, I think people hear, even people who are open to that, they're like, oh, those are ETs. It's like, well, it's more helpful for me to talk about dimensional planes and densities because ETs could be parallel versions of Earth, other humans, right? They don't necessarily, ETs don't mean they're going to look like UFO aliens. Like ETs are just necessarily beings that would exist outside of Earth. Could be in the third density, could be in the fourth, fifth. Pleiadians, what I sense is that this is a very, very ancient, ancestral sort of ET civilization that exists at a very, very high density to the point where sort of the collective is not in human, they're not in any form, though some souls come from that, let's say star collective, whatever. And they can incarnate into human form. They can maybe play out different lives, other kinds of ET lives, but they can have Pleiadian. Let's just call it soul ancestry, Pleiadian ancestry, right? It's like very far ancestry. And there's others. There's Arcturians and other things. I'm not going to claim to be an expert. I just that was the information I was hearing about Pleiadians, and that I was one, that I was that. And that actually hurt. My mother had mentioned that to me. She's like, "Oh, I'm a Pleiadian." Like years ago, it was just like off. I was like, "What?" But she doesn't even like talking about ETs, but she just heard that enough times. And so I was like, and I kept hearing that I was that, and that's why I was channeling this. In some level, you could say that all of what we channel are aspects of ourselves in some way. And there was this aspect of the conscious collective that identified itself as Ajah. I don't know, make what you want of that. That was sort of, I guess the way that it made sense to me was, there was an aspect of the collective consciousness that sort of formed itself as at a certain density to express a certain theme. I don't know, as a certain soul cluster of experience, and that that like Ajah is still part of the collective, but it it has different expressions.
Is that a Pleiadian collective or is it different? I'm just trying to follow.
Yeah. No, I don't think I've ever really attempted to explain it in this way. It's like, let's let's frame it this way. So human beings, right? On some level, some of us are open to the idea that human beings are all one, right? That there's a that we're a human collective, all branches of the same tree, right? But in this dimension, in third dimension, it's very easy to see the different branches. Oh, I'm a branch, you're a
Right.
branch, they're a branch, right? At higher densities, the sense that I have is that it's more of a we. It's less differentiated, but that Ajah is just a differentiated aspect that I called in to communicate with me. Not consciously, but it just came, that was just sort of assigned. The reason I use the word soul cluster is because I write a lot about this, and the sense I get is that, if we have individual souls, at higher densities, there are more like over souls, like clusters of souls that are really like the high self. That's like it's an umbrella for the full aspect of you, and that's more of a we. You and I are sort of soul aspects of that larger soul expression. And so all the parallel lives and past lives and all of that, they're all different soul expressions of this larger we collective at like the fifth dimension. And what I sense is that at higher and higher, it's like a whole star system collective of consciousness made up of, I don't know, a bajillion souls. And Ajah to me feels like a soul cluster. That's kind of the best way, a branch of that tree, but not a branch that we could necessarily identify. I don't know, but kind of a branch of the tree, not necessarily in physical form, but that's how I feel about it. That's how they've talked about it. And I've heard from other branches of the Pleiadian collective that have identified slightly differently, but I mostly hear from Ajah and Ava. And I'm told that they're like, probably the reason that I hear from them, I don't know. The reason I hear from them is because they're parts of my soul cluster, that at higher dimensional planes, I'm part of their cluster in a way, like almost like a future self, a higher self. I sort of mentioned this to you on the phone the first time we talked. I've heard from my future daughter, and she's a Pleiadian. She told me her name.
How did she come to you?
So I had, let's see. It started with my mother. My mother is pretty open in the spiritual realm. Though my journey has been quite triggering for her in many ways. But she's a channel in her own way. And she told me one day on the phone, I felt visited by my granddaughter. I just felt, and my brothers and I don't have any kids yet. So it was like, all right, well, she felt visited by a soul, and she knew it was a daughter. And I intuitively, in that moment, I was like, that's mine. I think that's mine. And I'd kind of intuitively just heard that, I was gonna have kids. I was gonna have kids soon, and it was gonna be, a girl and a boy, and then maybe a third one. And I was just hearing that information. And then my mother was, and then I interviewed a very powerful intuitive who I had worked with, and who was a pivotal part in my own intuition opening. And she was like, you can talk to them. You can call them in. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe I'll try that. But I didn't even like do it. It just like happened. Like the second that I had that permission slip of like, oh, that's a thing, she came right in. She told me her name. She told me when she's being born, the date, the specific date, which again, I hold quite loosely because it's all up there in the story form. But she started communicating with me, and then this is, thankfully I trust your audience is open. The information, sometimes through the channeled information, I would communicate with my future daughter's higher self, which was an aspect of the Pleiadian collective. It's like this ancestry. I don't know. But a lot of them were messages for me. But then when I started when I knew it was time to start sharing, it just started coming out as like more global missions, general kind of healing messages, and then it has since become more specific about medicine, because the message that I get is that I'm meant to play a role in the front lines of a new paradigm of healing. But at the beginning, it was all different kinds of things, and it was weird. And I was talking about AI. I didn't know anything about AI, but yeah. So it was this, and once I started sharing that, it was strange, but it felt right to use the word channeler at that point. Again, it's like I don't have to use that. I don't know. There's probably a lot of ways I could say it, but it kept coming, the word channel, enough times that it was just like, and I knew it was time to say something different about another aspect of myself outside of just intuitive psychologist. Like it felt like I needed to come a little bit further out of the closet. So the word channeler, it just allowed me to do that. And so that's why I use the word, because now when I show up, I do workshops or whatever, it's not so much in my own personal writings, it could be the Pleiadian. That's a lot of what I would call the high self, which is that kind of oversoul, fifth dimensional part of me that is really what I commune with and hear the most now. Because really I feel a lot of this journey for pretty much all of us is to commune with that high part of ourselves. We can have those fantastical experiences and that can give conviction, but a lot of it I feel is to bring us back to ourself, but our multidimensional self, the high self. And that's really what I communicate with most and write from. And so when I channel now, it's mostly from that place, from what I just call the high self. And I sense that's also, it's a little more tolerable for people. I opened my eyes. And it might sound a little bit different than the way I'm talking now, but like not a ton.
Would you be willing to share a channeling with us? Is that something that you could just do like on the spot, or is it you have to be inspired and it has to come through? And it's okay to say no, because I don't know what your process is. I'm just curious.
It's all of the above, but I feel yes. I feel yes that I could. And I'm happy to do that. And, because really all of this is channeling, like I don't know what I'm going to say until I say it. Is this me? Who's the one speaking? Right. And it feels more like me, and I haven't set the intention to be like communing with some other thing, but when I step into a place of speaking for a long amount of time, at this time in my life, I pretty much give it over to what's meant to come through. But let's see what happens. I'm gonna take a moment and I'll just start speaking, and it might sound, it will be me. It will just probably, or we'll see. I actually don't know. And I might just look a little weird as I with my body a little bit. Greetings. This is the Pleiadian collective known as Ajah. We are pleased to be with you here again today. This information is going to be about a new paradigm in healing taking place on your planet. This is what the channel is guided to speak about for much time now, and is continuing to write more and more about his own story and continuing to share more and more about what the collective is stepping into. Not just your collective, many collectives. Collectives infinite, more than you could possibly imagine in parallel realities, parallel universes, multi-dimensional realms. All in many ways, if you can believe it, focused around the focal point of your planet. You see, Earth is a focal point because it stands at the brink between light and shadow. Consider Earth in the middle of the spectrum. And at higher realms of light and light frequency, sources of being, sources of intelligence, of consciousness, do not have to work with shadow. They exist purely in light, purely in love. And at lower densities, at shadow realms below Earth, realms you might call hell, even though, frankly, your planet could be considered one such realm. They don't see much light. And again, there's not much creation happening. But at the focal point of Earth, the place of true transformation and transmutation, it is the place where souls go to transmute shadow into light. And though many on your planet are quite ready to leave, it is truly a privilege to incarnate. Because there, on your planet, you are a creator. You are creating your reality. You are transmuting darkness into light. And so we are all watching, encouraging, supporting you. So-called waiting, you could say, in the now, in presence, in our own version of timelessness. For you all, including the channel, to embrace, open, and step into this new paradigm, this new dimensional plane, so to speak, of healing, where there will be the possibility for rapid healing, rapid curing of disease, of ailment, the integration of what you call energy medicine, recognizing more and more the truth and being able to prove in your version of science and physics the existence of energetic planes, energetic frequencies that exist outside of what the human mind can perceive. The source of this within each of your bodies, and the opportunity to work with these energetic frequencies to heal. So much of what you know in healing is based in what you can see. And yet, you work with what you call emotions. You work with what you call thoughts, none of which you can see. Yet. But the new paradigm of healing will involve new advances in technology, one wave of artificial intelligence, as is continuing to develop, and instills much fear on your planet. And it's not to say there aren't things to watch out for, but we do invite you to hold the light and to see the inevitability of this merging between the human being and AI technology to support the evolution of mankind, as you call it, and the welcoming in the recognition of a galactic interface, of sort of joining a commission of light, joining an intergalactic field of beings who are also advancing, developing, moving toward oneness, but also rapidly healing whatever levels of physical density they may be working with. Now again, the beauty and uniqueness and focal point of Earth is that the human beings, such as it may be in the physical density, are not simply rising to be spiritual beings and leaving the bodies behind. No. Your technology is being held within that potency of creation that you are so potently able to use in the physical, to create things in the physical. You see, at higher densities and frequencies, creation, manifestation happens instantaneously, which is beautiful, but there is a uniqueness to the potency of creating in physicality, bringing something formless into form. This is a unique opportunity. And so the unique opportunity on Earth for healing is that you are transforming the physical vessel. You are transforming and transmuting the physical vessel, the nervous system, the brain, upgrading these aspects. This is where learning about the energetic system will support you. Learning about raising the energetic frequency and needing to go through the initiations of the physical body so it no longer needs to suffer illness, to suffer ailment, to suffer disease. But in the meantime, because that will take a couple thousand years of your time, in the meantime, what you will learn how to do is rapid curing. Rapid curing. With technologies, surgical procedures that will not need man, will not need woman, will not need human being. There will be technologies to simply rapidly heal the human vessel and upgrade it to continue the mission of light, which is going to get a lot greater very quickly for those who are ready to see. There is a collective mission you are being invited into. You are also concerned with your own minds, your own personal stories, so to speak, but you are being invited into the collective mission, which is unfolding now. But because there is so much polarity, so much disease, so much illness, it will be very important to step into this new paradigm of healing. So you don't have to worry so much about this human vessel, about this earth vessel. And of course, in healing does not just refer to the individual earth vessel, but to the larger earth vessel. There is a necessary healing of the planet itself, of which all bodies come from, that will necessitate the raising of frequencies to join this collective and galactic mission. And it is happening. It is happening. It is no longer a decision. It is no longer a choice. You are moving toward the light, which is why you are being supported by outer realms for new medicines, new technologies, which will rapidly seem to just be popping up in the minds of your scientists, just be popping up in laboratories. And you may say, wow, amazing discoveries, so random and coincidental. No, no such thing. The frequency of the planet is open now to allow in such ideas, because these ideas exist at higher frequencies. They already exist, but it takes the upgrading of the mind to allow in such information to be integrated and to be transformed from formlessness into form, to be played out in research, to be validated, to be used in your hospitals and labs and therapies. This is what is unfolding now on your planet, and this is what we are here as the Pleiadian collective, as the Council of Light, to support you with, to inspire you with, that there is light, because we know there are fires burning, and they may continue to for some time. But for those who are ready to receive this message, there is a council of light supporting you, and so excited for this mission, because everyone plays a role. It's no longer such a personal drama, such a personal story. It's a collective unfolding of which all beings of light may play a part. And we are so pleased to deliver this beautiful message of light to you now. And we thank you.
How was that?
It's so interesting because I have not done that in a while. I just was saying, Um, I don't really channel that kind of thing. I open my eyes, commune with the high self, and it's mostly me. And yet, right when I tuned in, it was like, nope, this is a Pleiadian message. Your eyes are going to be closed, and they're probably going to be flapping and look weird, but like, this is meant to happen this way. And it's just
Wow.
so, everything is so divinely orchestrated, right? Like, I was meant to take a break from that, and I frankly haven't really channeled like that or posted videos in a while. Like it was just I kind of was getting this message that it was like you're meant to take a step back. You're meant to sort of keep, focus on yourself, heal, etc. And yet the invitation here was like, nope, boom, Pleiadian Collective, Ajah, eyes, whatever, go. And so, yeah, wow, cool.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing that. That was beautiful. And are you when you channel, are you aware of what you're saying? I mean, can we
I'm
talk about what you just said? Are you like sitting like right here while you're channeling? Does that make sense?
Yeah, pretty much. And it's like a blessing and a curse, right? Like it's meant to happen that way. Like I if in an hour or two you asked me what I said, I might not like remember exactly. I would kind of remember the theme. Like I know we were talking about healing and stuff like that. The details, maybe if I don't know, but I'm aware, but because I'm aware, the process of it has been a process of moving through fear, embarrassment. Like, what if I'm wrong about this? What if I don't know? I don't know this particular science. I don't even know if this is sometimes I say things and I'm like, is that a part of the brain? I don't know. Like, and so it's like, it's this kind of like trust where again, it's like, how do you know? I don't, I'm kind of just aligning. And what I feel is part of the process for me as a vessel, is to clear out the fear, because the only thing in our way is fear. The only thing in our way from higher knowing, whether it's again story of Pleiadians or whatever, is fear. And so for me, when that fear voice comes up and says, "I don't know if this is right," it's a surrender process. Now it's gotten a little easier for me to surrender. But I'm pretty aware, and what I'm aware of is how it feels. Like I'm not thinking of the information; it's just coming, and it feels good. Sometimes I get a little scared, like my ego gets a little scared in what I'm saying. If like my ego gets triggered by the information, if it sounds too weird or it doesn't make sense, or if I stumble over my words, even in my own writing, that I don't share with a single person. Sometimes it scares me a little bit because it's about me and stuff, but it's so much a process of surrender, and I am aware. And yeah, we can talk about it for sure. But, because also what happens is so much of this information has been coming to me that it's things that I say sometimes, but I don't know where it comes from. I'll just say, like, I know some of what came through, and those were things I'd kind of heard before. So like it all starts to merge with like, that's where the doubts come in, and like, are you just making that up because you heard? But like making it up from where? I don't know. I heard it another time. It all gets a little jumbled for me as to whether it was channeled from this source or just from wherever. But yeah, I'm relatively aware. It just feels different. It feels different.
Yeah. No, super cool. I'm so curious about, there's so many channels and so many people saying that, we're about to shift into this new era. And, with all the UAP stuff happening right now and everything coming up, it's like, I'm just, I just can't help but wonder, like, how close are we? And do we have help? Do we have like little ET helpers that are going to come assist us in, evolving into the next stage of our evolution?
So I will answer from this perspective, which at this point, my perspective feels like all of it. It feels like it's the Pleiadians, it's the high self. It feels like it's all this guidance system that is me at this point. And so I will just answer from that place, that story. But again, I invite your audience to form your own story, what resonates. And if anything elicits fear, let it go, because nothing I say is meant to elicit fear. And if it does, it's your own nervous system reacting, and you should listen to that, just like I do. Take care of your body and don't worry about the story. But firstly, let me say this, that when other sources talk about things happening now, they don't always really know, or they kind of know, but they don't, time doesn't really exist, which is like a thing we hear, but like, it doesn't, not in the way we think. We have this linear structure because that's what helps our human brains make sense of it. But I mean, this is really proven in physics that it's not linear. And at higher dimensional planes, it's hard to really conceive of, but it's all now. And I'll say one thing about that, which is that some people hear that and they go, yeah, of course, like, well, there's past, present, and future, but whenever you experience it, it happens now. And that's not really what it is. It's that it's not just that whenever things happen, they happen now, but there's still past and future. It's that all things are happening simultaneously now, which is kind of hard to wrap your head around. But it's it's on a spectrum, because what I would call the fourth dimensional plane, it's not that the nth degree of that. It's more that time is looser, so you can sort of travel across time, so to speak. But what I hear, I've stopped trying to make sense of things in my own life on a timeline, although, my daughter is pretty convinced that she's coming at a certain date, and we'll say what, and I will share this. I don't think I've shared this with anyone, because this is one of those things that's out there that I have been getting for some time now, messages that I'm going to have a contact experience, or maybe I shared this with you, I don't know, that I'm going to have an ET contact, and that it's going to happen on October 29th, which happens to be the lunar eclipse, which I didn't know any of this, but I don't hold very tightly to that. Look, if I'm about to meet some ETs, fine, whatever. But I don't hold very tightly to these experiences, these messages, the dates. But what I will say about the timeline, because it's about the collective, because it's been coming to me from so many directions at this point, including people you've interviewed, is that it is very clear to me that 2024 is a huge year of shifting, like huge. That there are, I can't say exactly what's going to happen, but there are going to be some big shifts, and that, and even before I heard this, I didn't know much about astrology or human design. Now all of these different frameworks are, and for me, overlapping sources of information are very convincing for me. And so it's all aligning in those frameworks. But before any of that, I was just listening to Bashar, and he has been saying for literally 20 years. I mean, you can go back and watch the videos. He's been saying that 2024 is the window of open contact. So wow. It's just wild, because he said, when I saw him live, that at the end of 2026, early 2027, there was going to be an undeniable event, that all these sort of sightings and things were going to ramp up, and that at that time there's going to be an undeniable event where the majority of the planet was going to wake up to the idea that ETs exist. And I don't necessarily know what that means, if there's a visitation or something, whatever, but I pretty much align with that story and that timeline, that 2024 through 2027 is going to be pretty wild, and that after 2027 it is going to be the intuitive information that I hear channeled, and this aligns with some astrology, is that people hear about you've heard Age of Aquarius and things like that, right? Like that's been happening for I don't know, people have been using that phrase for a while. Mm-hmm. But that that is actually happening, that I think we're in the age of Pisces or whatever, and that it's just starting to shift. But the nowness of that is like, I sense around, the message I get is around like 2044 is when that really starts to, when the world will really start to look different, like very, very different, probably technologically very different, maybe even recognition, just more commonly of other beings who exist on Earth, because other beings exist on Earth too. We just can't see them. And maybe more common interaction, maybe visiting other planets, those kinds of things. I sense around 2044 through 2050 that like that. But the more recent now, the more recent future, I think is going to be the awakening to like the reality of these things. But because, and this is information I've been getting that's also just confirmed by the world we live in, people are literally creating their own realities, and it's only deepening because you see this in the advent of like fake news and no one knows what's true, and different journalistic integrity and all that kinds of things. And there's there's a very understandable reason to be upset with this and to say that we need to come to some collective truth. We need to restore truth. But the message that I get is that is not actually what we need, and that is not happening. That there are many truths because there are many worlds, and so people will be aligning with the world and the reality that works for them. And so people who are choosing to align with a world of fear are literally going to start align, and that we are. Other messages I've gotten that sometimes I've spoken about are that we are aligning more and more with communities based on the belief systems we hold. It's not so much tied to our family ancestry anymore, which it has been historically. You kind of, you make communities based on your family and things like that. It's more and more going to become based on our belief systems. And so that we will be aligning with people like, soul connections, brothers and sisters of light, Pleiadians, etc., whatever. Souls who have incarnated to walk similar paths. But it just will be, you'll meet people who see the world similarly to you. And we will be physically moving to live closer to those individuals, be playing out those communities, and be playing out those missions. And if the mission is based in fear, then we'll probably see that. You'll probably see lots of scary things, lots of people leaving the planet, etc. And if it's more light-based, then there will be more opportunities in line with the healing that I'm speaking about, in the service that I'm speaking about, in the ET connections and things. There will probably be more contact. And I believe those communities are starting to form now. And in 2024, there's probably going to be more events that really shake up people's realities. So people are starting to have to choose. People are starting to have to choose, do I believe that version of it? And we already see this. There's with COVID and other things, there's people have been invited to choose a story, right? Like, what do I think is true? And again, there are people who are like, well, this is obviously true. And it's like, well, we don't know that actually. And look, there are things that I believe that are more likely true and more evidence. And I still am a person of science in my own way. Other people wouldn't say that about me, but I still, am evidence-based in my own form of evidence, and so I see things that I hold to be true, but I've been invited to things that have me question it, and also just release judgment and let people have their own realities. It's not for me to convince people to see it my way or to see it any other way. And I think that's what we're really being invited into, that the more we try to hold on to this judgment of other people need to see it my way, other people need to see my reality because my reality is so obviously the truth and the evidence. It's like, well, consider that it can be true for you, but someone else's reality can be very true for them. And to the point where, if we believe in sickness and disease, we will continue to experience it. If we believe there's a possibility to heal rapidly, maybe we'll start to heal rapidly, and I'm not claiming any of these things to be the case, but I am quite open to those possibilities, and I have my own personal experience of healing that has been miraculous for me. So I'm pretty open, and I sense those selections of belief system and aligning with community is what's happening now, and will speed up in 2024 to the point where by 2027, there's probably going to be some firmly established communities where we just may not necessarily be associating with as many people who don't see it our way. And it's not going to be this, it's not going to be based in resistance, like, oh, I disowned my family. No, it's just going to be more natural, aligning with people. And it's not going to be out of hate, or at least for people who choose the light. It's not going to be out of hate or disavowal. It's just going to be more in what's aligning with you. What reality are you starting to see? To the point where probably, around 2044, things like that, it will really start to, like, the reality some people will talk about, there will literally be different versions of Earth, and I don't feel the need to get too into that. What I would say probably is that Earth as we know it is moving toward the light. It is raising in vibration. And those who continue to stay in the communities of fear will not be moving with it. And that's not to say they're all going to leave the planet, but it could be to say that they stay on a version of it that exists more in a lower density. Don't ask me how that's supposed to look or work. I have no idea. But that's kind of what I sense, and I do sense that technology will play a very important role, that the rapid advancement in technology and artificial intelligence, as the information has been coming through me, that is also being, to answer your question, yes, supported by other societies, let's call them. Other, technologies are, sort of being downloaded to us. So all of a sudden a researcher has an idea of how to improve AI or whatever, that is happening. And that's really going to support the advancement of the physical vessel to really grow and expand, because it's almost like two different things. Like the direct path of raising in consciousness is one thing, but that's been happening. There have been Ramana Maharshis, and there's been Jesus Christs, and there's been Eckhart Tolles, right? So that can happen, and can be more and more of that. But again, it's emerging with trauma healing. So what's happening now is that more and more of the technologies are going to support rapid trauma healing that will allow more and more people to raise in consciousness. And so it will be a merging of healing the physical vessel and raising the frequency. And with technology, we're going to really start to see that soon.
Wow. That sounds super cool.
And that's the story that I hear. That's a story that I hear.
Yeah, it's a great story. I love it.
It's a good story. I like it. I like that story too.
Are there any final messages that you have for the audience before we part ways?
The message I will deliver in parting is simply about light. And there's a very literal meaning to that word, that sort of like the source of all life, of all consciousness is light, and that we are lit by the sun and all that kind of thing. But there's also a metaphorical and a figurative understanding of that, which is an aspect of our experience that is love-based, and that is absent of fear. And what I will say is, on the heels of just talking a lot about different stories and different realities, what I will invite your listeners to consider, and always to validate for themselves, right, in their own bodies, in their own minds, is that there's always a light-filled version of every story. Always. And it doesn't matter how painful the story looks from one version, which is that a sibling or a parent is dying, or they've died, or there's wars raging and fires burning and the planet is burning and, there's so much calamity, there's so much terror, there's so much abuse. That is one story that is playing out, Consider that there is also a light-filled version of the story. Now, that is not to make light of the suffering. No one deserves to suffer. No one deserves to be traumatized or abused. No one deserves to be oppressed. It's to say that as you continue to go through this world and this experience, you can start to open to or invite in a light-filled version of your experience. Because all of this is being filtered through your experience. Whatever news you read, it's all being filtered through your mind, your body. Consider that there is always a way to hear and feel and see and know the story through love, and not through fear. And I'm not saying that it's easy and available to you in every moment. I'm just inviting you to consider the possibility. Because once you start to consider the possibility, you will be amazed at how many light-filled versions begin to populate your mind and just guide you more toward the light. It's not about sticking your head in the sand. You can stay aware, although you may not be guided to read the news 24/7. It's not necessarily going to keep you in the light. You can stay aware of what's happening, but you can hold the light. You can choose the light, the love in every moment. And it doesn't mean you stay blissed out and you stay unaware. But alongside all the fears and all the shadows that we have to be with and all the suffering, we can practice, because it's a practice, holding this light-filled version of your personal story and a larger collective story.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Thank you so much. Plug your podcast. Your amazing Be the Vessel podcast.
Sure.
I love it, by the way. You're such a great speaker, too. I really love listening to you. You're really great, and I really enjoy listening to your podcast. Even your Instagram stories are great.
Thank you so much. The podcast is called Be the Vessel. I interview people all across the spectrum of what was traditionally the healing arts, although frankly, it's pretty much anyone that I'm interested in or just that comes across my path and, that I have a connection with. Because really I started it because, I got the intuitive message to start it, but I just like having conversations with people, and it's been pretty lonely for me, which is part of my own karmic path to work through the loneliness, and because there were just a lot of things I was here to do on my own. But I'm stepping into that community of light, as I mentioned, and finding more connections. And the podcast has just been an amazing opportunity for me to connect with people. So it spans it's kind of like me. I can see myself as a bridge. So the podcast is kind of like me in the sense of I'll interview, very validated and credentialed Western medical doctors and psychologists, people that I know personally, and then shamans and astrologers and, Pleiadian soul brothers. And, it's just my thing. It's an integration of me. And then I also do I consider it like an art project. So everything I do is kind of an experiment. So sometimes I'll just hit record and I'll just talk, and it'll just be me, and I'll just be blabbing about whatever. And if people aren't sick of hearing my voice, then they hear me talk about different aspects of my life. Sometimes it's a channeled message. It's kind of, it's an open canvas, you could say. And a lot of the things I do are kind of like that. But yeah, Be the Vessel, streaming wherever you listen to stuff. Instagram, Dr. Daniel _Atkins. There's a Patreon thing that has some more of I have a separate podcast that I do just for this Patreon community, which is a healing series. It's a cool creative thing. I think it's cool. Where I do, because I still work with clients individually as an intuitive psychologist or channel. I don't know, whatever I call myself these days. And with consent, I record some of those, and it's only people in that community. But I post it there. And I've enjoyed that, but, workshops and stuff, but yeah, it all unfolds. But yeah, the podcast.
Amazing. Well, it was so great talking to you and finally seeing you face to face. Well,
So glad.
over the screen. Yeah.
Yeah. So glad and so blessed and grateful for the opportunity, David. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Have an amazing week. We'll talk soon.
Okay. You too.